Okay. I don't know how to, I mean, okay. So what? All right.
I was waiting for you to make your statement.
Okay. I don't have a state. I sent you that video. I was forgetting about the book altogether. I was like, hey, this might be interesting to talk about. And I don't know if it was or not, actually.
I
But
did. I actually just started. And when I say I just started watching it, I am 37 seconds in, so I didn't
yeah.
actually get. I did not actually get to watch it yet. So
Do you ever watch Gavin's stuff? Because I'm always cracking on his videos because he's really he takes orthodoxy to task. So I'm like always going, okay, this is a caricature, you know. I mean, he's good. He's
mhm,
actually a smart guy, really smart guy, and I like his approach.
mhm.
If you ever met me, you wouldn't realize that because you're like, aren't you the jerk who's always posting on my videos? But that was an interesting video. I was just like, huh,
Yeah,
weird.
I haven't watched anything of his. His I maybe it's his brother Dane, or is that his dad?
Maybe his dad.
Okay, he wrote a book several years ago called Gentle and Lowly.
Hmm.
Um, and we got a bunch of free copies because they like that publishing house that every once in a while they'll just send out an email like, hey, you can have 300 copies of this book if you want to. So we got a bunch of copies of it a few years ago and gave it out for during our Christmas Eve gathering. um, and then we did our small group did a small group on that and went through that book. um, I mean, it was good. I mean, very Presbyterian.
Yeah,
um, I mean, very I don't know that I want to say Calvinistic, um,
probably.
but I mean certainly that's the bent. Um, but it was good. I mean, it was. I thought it was good. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we did it. Um, but no, I haven't watched any of this guy's stuff or anything like that. So
No, I'm not necessarily recommending it. I mean, mostly he's a smart, smart guy. I don't, that was an interesting one to me because I
mm,
don't know, maybe it ties into this. I don't know. Just because I don't know. If you end up watching it and you have many thoughts,
I will watch it.
I mean, I'm not pushing you on that. It's more of like I saw it, I was like, huh, because it was different than most of his other stuff.
Right.
So how do we want to start this?
Um,
Just like a reintroduction of what we're doing?
yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So hey, we're reading and discussing The Patient Ferment of the Early Church by Alan Kreider. We went through the introduction last week, and today we're talking about chapter one, the improbable growth of the church, which um, I thought that word growth, I asterisked that, so I thought that would be something worth us spending maybe a couple minutes on. Um, and your question always asked is, so how do you want to start this? Um, maybe that's the starting point. I'm curious, how do you when you hear that word growth, church growth, like what does that mean to you?
Before I answer that, if I start act like it looks like I'm jiggling or whatever, like here, if you're having problems with my feed, let me know. I think
Okay.
I think it's a good question. Um, because there's lots of forms of growth. Um, but I think it's good to ask that question because, you know, if we think of growth as just numbers, then
Yeah.
we're not doing something right. Although it is definitely numbers. I mean, heck, you read Acts and it's like, and 3,000 were added that day. So clearly the apostles were, they understood that numbers were significant. So growth, I think I'm guessing that the author is
Hmm.
going to be talking about growth in those terms, but probably also I would guess as well, even if maybe he doesn't have a full grasp on it, maybe the growth in terms of how they're worshiping, although he does
Hmm.
talk about that. And then maybe growth two would be obviously spiritual growth. I mean, clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, growth in numbers and spiritual growth are like the two, I think, the things you're going to be hinting at here.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. My computer just went wacky for some reason.
What's
I
all
don't know
little
what just happened.
there?
Yeah, I thought just the at the top of page 8, that very first sentence, it says, "No one disputes that the early church was growing, but its growth is hard to measure." And then obviously, I mean, he goes, like you said, he goes on to talk about numeric growth, and this is 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So how I think that when it says it's hard to measure, like from a very practical standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's kind of like I see all these things that maybe like push on like those kinds of things, like, and they like their standards, and this probably breaks open a whole bunch of conversations that we could have. Like, they didn't do things the way that we do them today. Like, we don't have like instantaneous way. They did not have instantaneous ways to measure things. For us as a church, we use something called Planning Center, just like from an administrative standpoint, that helps us keep track of all those things. And I mean, they just didn't have that. So I just think it like begs, like, growth is hard to measure. Certainly numerical growth was hard to measure. Um, and that is something that we pay attention to. Like any good evangelical church does, is pay attention. My pastor in Cedar Rapids, Bill Holly, he like his little phrase, it was like so pastoral. It was nickels and noses, right? Like that's how we measure things, nickels and noses.
Yep.
But it is more than that. It's spiritual growth. It's and that's probably corporately and individually.
Yep.
Going through that.
I don't think that's isolated to evangelicalism. I mean, in Orthodoxy, obviously, I look at it all the time. We compare notes, like how is your attendance? Now, I think in Orthodoxy, or generally speaking, Orthodox churches, my experience is depending on where you go, they tend to be like, I would call them smaller. So like a good size Orthodox church is going to be somewhere between 150 and 200 people, and then they're going to split off and form a new mission.
Okay.
But they might go bigger, depending.
So
make big churches.
why? Like, I know I've wrestled through some of this on my own, so I'm kind of curious, like, what, and maybe I get to say it to you. Maybe your paradigm doesn't allow for this. I think the evangelical model in church growth is, our facility holds X. We now have Y. So the default switch is, let's have another service.
Yeah.
My hunch is your paradigm may, and this is an assumption. My assumption and my hunch is your paradigm doesn't allow for that.
Well,
in the way that our paradigm would.
Yeah, I would say it's different. I mean, it's actually an interesting point. So for you all, it would be come in, serve the service, pause, reset, new group comes in, serve the service, pause, reset, new group comes in. For us, it makes for interesting conversation. So we have in our church, of course, an altar. We would call it's a holy table, and we serve the divine liturgy on that. That's where communion is prepared. It's probably analogous to what you would see in, I mean, many churches, and maybe your church has a communion table in the front. I don't know if you guys do or not.
We don't.
Many churches do, but ours is is differently. It's oriented differently. So But once I've served the divine liturgy on a Sunday, like in our church, many services technically happen during the day. So you got lots of different things that can happen during the
Right.
day. You've got the people and the manpower to do it. But on a Sunday, once a priest has served the divine liturgy, he's not permitted to serve another one. Now, another priest could come in, and many Orthodox people don't realize this, could come in and serve a divine liturgy for another group of people. And that happens a lot of times in ethnic churches where you have non-English speakers and they want to do a service in, well, Church Slavonic, which is a form of Russian, or Greek, or Romanian. So you could do that. You can do that. But I think you're right, though. In general, though, when we get to a certain point, our mindset usually, not always, is make a new church, because you're going to be drawing people from, at that point, an hour and a half away. So you want them to, have a church close to them. That would be that's the main idea. Sometimes it's build a bigger church, that's just it, and keep building it bigger and bigger.
Which is, that's a very evangelical. Well, I probably shouldn't lay that over the top of that. I would say that's a very evangelical practice.
Sure.
How about that? Maybe it's not a model, but it certainly has been the practice over the last. I'm probably I'm just so historically stupid, but I definitely think that's certainly been the evangelical practice for the 30 years that I've been in this thing. Is when more people come, you move to multiple services, and then when whatever happens in that situation, then your next step is to expand the building. And I want to say I don't know how I feel about that, but that's not true because I think I know exactly how I feel about that. I'm not. I think about here at Westway. First off, we have a large facility. Before my time, Westway followed that model. They were in a neighborhood, so it was a neighborhood church in town. They moved out here to where we are now. They bought a lumber yard, remodeled it into a quote unquote sanctuary, auditorium, gathering space, and then they outgrew that because then they were having multiple services. And then the next move was build the big auditorium, the big space. You've been here. You've seen that.
Yeah. Yep.
Which seats, I would say uncomfortably, which seats very uncomfortably. It's rated for 800, which I can't imagine how, what that would look like. But I know, for us, we don't run anywhere near that.
Right.
I think comfortably we could probably have in that space 500, maybe a little bit more.
Right.
But then we have a parking lot issue because our parking certainly is not rated for that.
Yep.
Which I think was one of the things kind of over the years that happened here. Our parking isn't really rated for that right now. But I definitely think I could see if we were to grow, and we are having a bit of growth right now. I could see how the next move would be. Oh, well, then we should move to multiple services. And when I say this, that's a buildup. And I don't know if I want to do that.
I think it's a sacrifice if you end up doing that. It's tough. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're Orthodox or evangelical or whatever, because, and maybe it's less obvious in evangelicalism in some ways where it might be more obvious. Maybe I'm just thinking differently. I think with our own church, it's so essential on Sunday that everyone's, the idea is, of course, that everyone gathers, worships together, communes together. And then when you start to break it up into the smaller groups, yeah, it becomes, I mean, it might be a necessary thing. I mean, you think like in our own paradigm, we start missions. So our church is a mission. We are sort of a spawn of a couple of other churches. We, God willing, we'll get to the point where I'm like, okay, I can't take it anymore. Let's send some of these people away, get a new priest to take them. And, because there's too many of them, I want to be able to really, pastor these people adequately. And so ideally you do that, or you can do what you do. Well, like many churches do, just build a much, much bigger church and hire, a bigger pastoral staff. But yeah, it's tricky, I think, especially in that paradigm where when you start having to break it up into multiple services, you end up with like multiple churches kind of, layered on top of each other. It's weird.
Yeah. And so I want to like caveat this conversation because of the
Yeah.
9 people that watch this, there might be some that have multiple services.
Yeah.
I am. So if that's you as a person who's watching this, like I'm like, this isn't about you. This
Yeah.
isn't about like, oh, I think churches who do multiple services are stupid. Like I don't think any of those things are true. I I I I'm just wondering, kind of along the lines of what we talked about back in season 2, back in season 1. Maybe it was this. Maybe it was at the beginning of this. Like I'm not sure. Like I'm not sure if that's within my skill set.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's within my bent. And there might be someone who watches this from my church and thinks, oh man, like in this conversation, what John has just done then is he has freaking capped the growth of our church, and we are never going to expand beyond that. But I'm just trying to wrestle through that process of I'm not so sure that we would immediately jump to multiple services because I I don't know, like I don't want to do a solution to something that may not be the real issue. I mean, I see churches, especially evangelical churches, um, at Christmas time that are, hey, all weekend long, and this might press on you a little bit. Um, I see evangelical churches all weekend long. We're gonna have 14 services, and I want, like, I sit at that, like it's easy for me to look into that from the outside and say, okay, but how is that, like how is that serving your staff?
Yeah.
Um, and and I know, I mean, I think in the back of my mind, or in the back of, like, for us, Christmas is like, you got to be here Christmas Eve, like that's just kind of our deal.
Yep.
But I look at some of that stuff and I think, or Easter, hey, we're gonna have 10 Easter services. I just think, man, I understand that. I can wrap my mind around it. But on the other hand, I have some what I feel would be some legitimate questions about, do we really want our staff to have to be here 14 times over the course of the weekend, and not just drum that up to, hey, sorry, it's Christmas and Easter. You signed up for this.
I don't want to, and I'm with you, I don't want to judge people for that. I just kind of
Yeah.
want, what is the motivation and the expectation? Do you think, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I think it's a bad idea, period. That's coming from an Orthodox priest who during Holy Week will serve, 15 services.
I like this. I'm so glad that we made that connection.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, but they're unique, they're unique services, and they give people a chance. Like, if you're going to do it, so you're giving, in a sense, the same body the opportunity to come to many different things over a period of time. It's very, I would tend to think that once you get into doing the same service multiple times, let's use, you said Easter, for us, a Pascha. We serve that service at midnight on the day of Easter, on the Pascha day, because we want to serve it at the very first moment of the day to emphasize this. Now, there are some parishes, as an example, who will serve a midnight liturgy, the very first moment you're permitted to do that. And then there'll be a bunch of people who couldn't come to that because they had little children and they, for whatever reason, that usually isn't a problem, or they're older or there's some other thing that's and so in some parishes they'll have another priest come in, a different priest come in and serve the Pascha liturgy in the morning. That way people can come to that, and it makes some sense because there's a real challenge to that. So I get that part of it, but it would be strange to me, like I think I know of someone, I think told me they had 7 Easter services in a row, and it's all the same one. And I tend to think like, what is it? What's happening? Like, what is like for us again, without hopefully not being judgmental? Like the goal of it for us is communion. Like everything is leading us to this
Yeah.
point in the service, and it's important that we take communion on at that time and in that that space. If I mean, not to minimize it, but like if all you're doing is like, well, it's Easter, I want to go to church on Easter, kind of wonder if that's feeding into something that people,
Mm.
I mean, I guess I'm glad for them to go to church, but it's weird. It gets weird to me. I guess I look at it
Yeah.
this way. Let's say it's 7 services. Let's say it's just 5 services. I can't imagine it doing the same service like 5 times in a row. It's like my worst nightmare being in the band, having to play the same set like multiple times in one day. As much as I like playing music, like that just by the third time I'm going to be like, I don't want to hear these songs ever again, even though it's just 3 times. So I do wonder like what happens. It's done. I mean, people are doing it, and I don't want to say I know better. Well, I feel like I do in some ways, but it's strange to me. I don't know. It seems like a strange thing to me, you know?
Yeah. And yeah, and this is probably for maybe Westway people who are thinking that I'm capping this thing. Um, how about I'll just say this. Maybe I'll let myself off the hook a little bit. I mean, there was a time prior to March 2020 where if someone would have said to me, "We should be online,"
Yep.
I'm like,
Yep.
"Nope,
Yep.
no sinking way.
Good
We
point.
are never going to do that." And like probably a better thing to say would be like for now, like nope, for now we're not going to be online. So how about this? This will be the pressure reliever, and then everyone can go back to whatever it is they do all day normally. Like for now, I would say it's safe to say we don't have plans to move to multiple services.
Yeah.
Because first off, I mean we're not in that spot,
Yeah.
and things can change, and so we can just say for now. But I do have that question of if we were to do that, maybe it would be a better idea to you call it a mission church. I think we would call it a church plant
Yeah.
or
Same.
a different location. And I
Yeah.
have a whole slew of thoughts on that side, which we won't get into
Yeah.
either. But I think I would for now, I think I would be tempted to say, hey, you know what? We have 500 seats and our start time is 10:15.
Yep.
And if you want one of those 500 seats, like lovingly, you probably ought to get here. So you have one of those 5. Like, I mean, that's probably what you ought to do.
I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. I think it's very pastoral, actually. I
I
mean,
mean,
we could do so many things with our time, Why is it
right,
Sunday?
right.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this has nothing to do with, with
Well,
the topic, but I
I don't
loved
know.
it because like to be able to think through some of these things, and especially from your perspective, where I would like if I were to just peer into your calendar without knowing any of the details, I would say you guys have multiple services, and
Yeah.
that doesn't do what you do justice in any way, shape, or
Yeah.
form.
Yep.
But you guys do have multiple services. Um, So it's just, yeah, it was, this was, thank you. This was like, this was good for me to kind of out myself on this and just kind of think through that. Cause I just think for now, like if we just magically had 1,000 people show up, like we might have to reconsider that.
It is, I still feel like it's a sacrifice. If you're going to go, I mean, I kind of, like I said, it's like, it's one thing to have, for instance, on Easter for us.
Mm,
So, okay. So, Holy Week, you do something, at least one service every day, some on Holy Friday for us before Easter or Pascha. We have three services, at least three services that day. On the Saturday before Easter, we have a service in the long service in the morning. We have our midnight service at night. Then after we have the midnight service, we all go home. We come back on Sunday in the afternoon. We have a Vesper service. They're all different services, but the thing about that too is like you, in a sense, like people can, in one sense, everyone has certain things they need to plug into. Like everybody commonly has to plug into, but then again, too, some people can't come to this one, but can come to this one over here. Whereas this one here, like everybody needs to make every effort to be there for that. So it's like I think that maybe too, like and I wonder how that could work in an evangelical paradigm, because I really do think repeating that same thing over and over is
uh-huh.
probably really tough. Oh,
Yeah,
I did it again, man.
you did the
Put my
thumbs
hands up.
up.
Put my hands up. Repeating that same thing over and over probably takes it out of it takes. I mean, I think especially from the evangelical perspective, when so much depends on
Mm,
spontaneity, you might say, the sense of
mm,
like I feel this here. Like I mean, I serve the liturgy, and some Sundays is amazing, and many Sundays it's just work. And I'm glad just to do the work. I'm glad to have a book in front of me that gives me the prayers, and
mm,
I can pray and I can enter into the prayers. But some Sundays, like man, it just flows out of me, and I'm grateful for the difference. The two, I'd like the one to be more the case. So I do wonder. I mean, I think there's got to be. I would tend to be critical of the multi-service thing for your
mm.
sake, because I feel like it's gonna, by the time you get to service number two or three, depending on what you're doing. Um, and I do think it ties into the book a little bit, because it talks, the book gets into how they started to deal with this influx of people. Like, what were they doing with them? What were the
Yeah,
service, you know?
yeah.
Um, and yeah,
So I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna like I just thought of a caveat. I'm gonna jump into this really quick. I think okay. So maybe this will make my people who think I just capped the church. Maybe this will make them feel even better. Um, let's say all of a sudden we had 1,000 people here because for whatever reason this is the year that I'm going to call it the Scottsbluff Church Shuffle,
yep,
where like this is the year where everyone's been at their church for X amount of years, and now they're just making the transition, like they got bent out of shape because somebody played the guitar too loud, or like whatever that thing was, because we're so spiritually immature,
right,
like whatever that thing was. And we just had 1,000 people here show up from a whole bunch of other churches who are all bent out of shape for whatever reason they're bent out of shape for. um, I would say my interest level in going to multiple services and or doing anything else would be slim to none.
yep, yep,
Let's say, and you mentioned the text, for whatever reason we had 1,000 new believers roll into the place. um, I think then at that point I would be way more open to examining our model and doing something different.
yep,
If it's just to assuage the people who are bent out of shape at their other church, like I'm just like transfer growth. I'm just like, if they're moving here from another city,
right,
I'm all
right.
I'm all for it. but transfer growth doesn't really do very much
Mm-mm.
like for me, because like we have talked about before, like if somebody's been out of shape at quote unquote their church, um, it might be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, they're going to be bent out of shape here about something, and they're
Oh,
just going
yeah.
to leave.
Yeah. Yep.
So maybe that's a better caveat of, hey, if we have 1,000 people who aren't believers all rolling in here,
Right.
even before they become Christians, because they're hearing the gospel, and like they're responding to it, and all of those kinds of things, dude, then I would throw out my little cruddy mindset pretty quickly. Um, but yeah, just for transfer growth, like I don't think I would do that.
Mhm. I mean, I think in that
Which
paradox,
goes into which goes into what you were going to talk about, which is, yeah, we're growing, so now like what do we do?
yeah. Well, I'm not sure. Does it, I'm not sure actually if this chapter answers that. It talks a lot about like, them talks some about kind of, I think I like the word improbable growth. I like that was pretty interesting to me, particularly because Kreider,
Mm-hmm.
the way he presents it too is like, one of the qualities I think of the church at that time was like if you I think it's like page 11 where he talks about most improbable of all, the churches did not use their worship services to attract new people. I just thought that's really kind of cracks me up because it's true. It was they were doing something that they knew to be the right way, the thing to do, the way to worship, and then either that would draw people in or it didn't. And that's a different. I mean, it's a different approach to what there's a faithfulness to what is true and right. I recognize as an Orthodox Christian, I'm reading what he's talking about going on there, and he's getting that from like Eusebius. He's probably getting it from Saint Justin Martyr. He's getting it from some history books, but I recognize in our services the same kinds of stuff he's describing that they were doing, um, and so it's an interesting thing that calls into question kind of like what any of us Orthodox, Evangelical, Roman Catholic, whatever it might be, are hoping that will happen by, like in our case, having a big, beautiful church building or having now you've seen our services before, like having a choir that's really accomplished who can sing the services with beauty, or in other paradigms, having a good band and a worship leader or whatever it might be, you know, and And I know for me, when I became Orthodox, it was not about what attracted me on the surface level because all of that was missing, like completely missing in the
Mm-hmm.
parish that I came to. But what was there was ultimately was people who were serious about their faith and who were willing to open their doors and open themselves up to other people. And I think I already knew I thought I knew what I was looking for when I came there. But just thinking about stuff that he's saying in here too, I think it goes obviously growth. When we think about growth, is still going to be the Lord's doing,
Right.
which I tend to I don't know about you, I tend to forget that. I get
Mm-hmm.
worried about it. I think, oh, I know this person has said they're going to come to church on such and such a day, and I already
Right.
know there's going to be problems that day with this or that thing going on, and what are they going to think? And now I just have to like, I can't fix that. I mean, I can't fix it. They just have to see
Yeah.
it.
But I want to ask a question, and I don't want to I don't want you to feel like I'm putting you on the spot, as a question might seem. Um, I mean, I what I like about what you just said was, um, or I guess the tenor of what you just said was, we as Orthodox, we don't do what we do to attract new people. My guess is you're just living out, like what you're doing is you're embodying the faith in a very specific way and in a very specific paradigm. I would like to say that, and maybe it's not a question. I mean, I would like to say that I don't know. I'm not so sure that we are doing our, like, the way that we embody and live out our faith. I'm not so sure that that attracting new people is what it's geared toward either.
Yeah.
Like, is it, and maybe this is the whole crux of this entire podcast that we've been talking about. Like, is it possible for, I want to be careful what finger I hold up so I don't get thumbs up or anything.
Yeah.
Like, is it possible that, I think it could be easy for someone to look at what evangelicals do, what we do, as we have an attractive, like, we're trying to get people model, an attractive model. But I mean, couldn't it be true too that, like, we're also simply trying to embody our own paradigm, and embody, like, who we are, um in the same way that you're, I mean, obviously not specifically, but in a similar way that you are as well.
I mean, yeah, yes, yes and no.
Well,
Um,
I'm not trying to trap you with the question.
no, no,
So,
no.
like, I don't mean that to be as point. I don't mean that to be as pointed as, or as gotcha. So I'm like, I want you to, feel like, I want you to respond however, like, you want to respond.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I mean, I think there's a yes in there because you're doing so, you've grown up in the Protestant church. I was raised in the evangelical Protestant church, and we worked within the paradigm we knew. That's all we knew.
mm,
If you don't know, like if you go to Greece, for instance, or you go to Russia, the oddballs are going to be the Protestants, and to the point where Protestants feel persecuted. And I would want to put a pitch out there to say you probably are being a little bit, but you've moved. You don't understand. The one thing that I would say about missionaries who go to those places is they don't get it because they don't understand. They genuinely don't seem to understand, like, really what's happening. For those cultures, anything that isn't Orthodox, even if these people that are dealing with are not faithful Orthodox Christians, but are just Orthodox nominally, anything else is heresy.
mhm.
So here, we're raised in this. You're raised in this. I was raised in this. So I think what we're doing is, I think I look back and I kind of look at that transition in the. Hopefully, I'm not getting too roundabout here. That transition probably in the very end of the 90s, early 2000s, where suddenly it wasn't just the strange churches out west that had contemporary music becoming the norm, drums, guitars, and everything else. All of a sudden, you started to see this pop up in churches where it was never the case. It was, always, the Christian Missionary Alliance that I grew up in until probably, and, we went to TFC together, that would have never flown at
Right,
all. And now they have, a huge music hall. They have worship
right,
bands, multiple worship bands, in places where we used to get in trouble for playing music,
yeah,
with
yeah,
drums in it.
yeah,
Because,
yeah.
so I think what you're doing from the Orthodox perspective, and I think the generous Orthodox perspective would look at evangelicals and say, if you're honest with themselves, they're working within what they know.
Mm.
It's interesting looking back and kind of seeing how, as the older generations sort of either died off or sort of lost their grip on the churches, um, that the younger people were then more free to come in and say, well, this is the music we know. That really, let's face it really comes down to music and style. That's really what it comes down to, because the
Yeah,
format generally is still the same. You have hymns of a form, you have, announcements, you have scriptural readings, you have preaching, you have some sort of spiritual challenge. God willing, I mean, you still have some form of the Eucharist in the church, but it's the format. So I'm trying to think what your original question was. It was, I think there are similarities in the sense that, that we're doing what we know, although I'm a convert, obviously, to Orthodoxy. So I had to learn this life. But I think the key difference is just age and history. I think that's gonna be the difference. And it always goes back to a question of like why for the Orthodox, looking back, like why is it that the evangel like when we especially when you read this, I don't know if he ever asked the question, but like why is it that we like I say we, but the Orthodox still do this. Catholics still do a lot of this stuff too, and Anglicans to some degree, depending on who you talk to, and some Lutherans. But why is it in general, though, that with the Reformation and the Protestant sort of revolution, that the things he talks about have stopped, and so I think that's the bigger question. I'm trying to think what your original question was. You were asking this is more of a
I mean, it was just simply about like you something you said a minute ago. Um, Someone says, "Hey, I want to come to St. James," and you're like, "Oh man, I hope it's not that Sunday." That like that kind of thing.
yep,
And we interestingly, we just had a very similar conversation to that. This past week, we burned our mortgage, and um, it was kind of a like we had talked about that, like we wanted it to be kind of a like a like more like I don't know, more of a celebration thing, whatever that means. Um, we have so for us we have different like praise teams, music teams, and some of them are more um I'll say more filled out, more instrumentation than others.
yep,
And one of the conversations that we've kind of had here about that is I'll do better. I'll go back to the Easter conversation. We might be tempted to say, well, on Easter, when we have all of the Christmas Easter people coming into our building, we our temptation would be let's have a really filled out full team because this temptation to attract new people or really like show who we are or like whatever all of that kind of stuff is. And one of the things that I really appreciate about where I am in that, and I appreciate where we are as pastors, like that's really not our model.
yeah, yep,
Is like, you know what, it like whoever's going to be whoever's going to be on the rotation, like whatever week that happens to be on the rotation, like that's just what's going to be up there.
yep,
And because our job is to proclaim Jesus.
yep,
And you can proclaim Jesus with, I mean, my paradigm, my personal paradigm, my personal paradigm is you can proclaim Jesus with a filled out music team on stage, and you can proclaim Jesus with our creative arts pastor playing acoustic guitar
mhm,
and his wife singing next to him, which is what we had on Sunday.
right,
And that was on a quote unquote big Sunday. And some people might look at that and think, oh, like that would have been a great time to have a more filled out team. And the conversation we had on Monday was, or it's really an opportunity just to demonstrate this is who we are as a church. And
right.
there are going to be some weeks where we have this big fold out team and other weeks we don't. And if that's something that matters to you, um, like I'm not sure that we're your place.
Which I think is a fair thing to say. I think people need to realize that. I think that's not something that I'll give a counterpoint to it too. I would say on one hand, beauty is really important.
Mm.
I think offering the best we can offer to God at all times is, and I think I think we need to, you know, challenge ourselves like how we appear, how we're comporting ourselves in the church. But also too, like what we say, how we do it. So there's obviously something to it. But like I said for myself, my first experience with an Orthodox church and an Orthodox worship service was just pitiful. I mean, it was terrible. but it was lovely. I mean, it was something for me that I saw something more in it, which is encouraging to me, with our small church where people could go to, say, in our area, you could drive 2 hours northeast of us to go to just a, there it goes again, 2 hours northeast of us to go to this beautiful Orthodox church. We're gonna, God willing, build a very, to God's glory, a very beautiful building in the next few years. But that building isn't the solution. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the shape of our
Mm,
prayers. So if
mm,
our prayers are shaped in a heavenly, beautiful manner, that building will take on that beauty. If our prayers are ugly and selfish, doesn't matter how much we cover it in gold, it won't
mm,
be any better.
mm,
So there, there's all that, there's that side of there, there's two sides of it. Like you said, like, for you guys, your paradigm, you can have a full worship team or you can have the acoustic duo. In our case, we can serve a beautiful liturgy in the biggest cathedral. We can serve the same exact service at a campsite, in Northeast Georgia, which I've done before, under a little tent. And it's the same service and the same words and the same intentions and the same ultimately results, you might say. And so it's not. Yeah, I do think we can easily get caught up in when it comes to growth and thinking like, well, the solution is like bigger building, better programs, maybe better pastor. Sometimes can be the case. People will say, and that some of those things can be true, but it isn't really. When you read this book, particularly, like, and you see, and I see it in the Orthodox services because we do a lot of this stuff. Like, we literally kind of say, you're, in one sense, people aren't supposed to be here for this part of the service. Like, certain people aren't, although we still allow that for certain things. That's weird. That's super weird. It's like it's counterintuitive. Like, but yet, like what he's saying was that at that time these services weren't about evangelizing people. They were there to feed the people of the Christians, and to minister to them, to worship together. And then those people, I like to use that phrase, people of goodwill, who come in our doors, who are um, willing to, particularly for us as Orthodox, because we're weird, by at least American standards, willing to come in and go, okay, I see this. I don't know what I'm looking at, but I see something in this, stick around. If this is what you want, great. If you don't, like you said, we have to just say, God bless you, and do what you
right.
need.
Yeah.
I think that's better. I don't, I really do. I wonder, well, I don't wonder. I have many thoughts about the, particularly the mega church model. And I think I'm glad to see maybe that it's already peaked and maybe it's going to be going away. Um, is the somehow the litmus test for or
Mm,
the a gold standard for church? It just isn't. It just isn't.
right.
Shouldn't. My opinion. Churches should grow. I mean, you're not capping your church's growth by saying maybe this isn't the best. Even if it's done, maybe this isn't the best idea for me or for Westway. And I know for myself, I look at what other priests do. I'm like, well, that seems to work for them, but but maybe that's not who I am, and maybe that's not
Right.
who parish is.
Yeah.
And
I think just my favorite thing from chapter one. In closing, I never. Do you ever say that in your sermons? In closing, do you
I
ever
try
let
to
them
do
know
this.
that
I
you're
just,
landing the plane?
yeah, let people know it's been a long time. I know it's been a whole 15 minutes, but I'm almost done here.
In
I don't mind saying
closing,
that. My people, if they hear that, I don't care if they hear that. Go ahead.
in
Include.
closing, I just like the the whole last about the whole last paragraph in the chapter was good, but just the especially the end. The churches grew in many places, taking varied forms. They proliferated because the faith that these fishers and hunters embodied was attractive to people who were dissatisfied with their old cultural and religious habits, who felt pushed to explore new possibilities, and who then encountered Christians who
Yep.
embodied a new manner of life that pulled them toward what Christians called rebirth into a new life. And I think that's ultimately what you just said a minute ago.
Yep.
We can have that gilded space, and if if as Christians we're not embodying the Christian life, like it doesn't matter because
Programs.
because those things are not like they're not enough to sustain
Yeah.
the faith.
I
And
think,
that's why I say if we had 500 people show up from other churches, like I don't want to say I don't know if I'd want them because that might be a little harsh. Maybe a notch down from that of um I mean unless you're if you're not hungering and thirsting for righteousness but you're hungering and thirsting for an experience, you might find that here.
yeah, yeah. But
um
you, like you said,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
that's good close.
Cool.
That's good.
Done. Yeah, we did. I did say in closing
You
and
did.
then we closed it. Good. Well, maybe as a viewer, you have many thoughts. We encourage you to share your many thoughts by commenting, and maybe you like this and you can like that, and maybe you'll be willing to share it. You can follow us and all of those kinds of things. So we're just going through this book, and there will probably be many a rabbit trail as we did today. But thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time. We're going to talk about chapter 2. In theory, we're going to talk about chapter 2 of Alan Kreider's book, The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. So thanks so much for watching. We do appreciate you watching this and taking your time to listen to um, a couple of guys who 30 years ago were probably like, this is not where we're going to end up. So thanks for so thanks for entertaining us. Thanks for watching. See ya.